In September 1943, Lieutenant Robert Bobby Mitchell took off from an airfield in England on what his squadron was told was a routine reconnaissance mission over occupied France. His P-51 Mustang never returned. The Army Air Forces declared him missing in action, presumed. His family received the standard letter of condolence and a folded flag. 60 years later, hikers discovered the rusted remains of his aircraft deep in a Belgian forest, 200 meters from his supposed flight path, with bullet holes that didn't match enemy fighter patterns. And inside the cockpit, investigators found something that would force the military to reveal a classified mission so sensitive it had remained buried for 6 decades. The rescue of Allied prisoners from a camp that officially never existed. Captain David Mitchell had been staring at the same stack of personnel files for 20 minutes when the call came through. As the Army Air Forces liaison to the Joint Missing Personnel Accounting Agency, he'd grown accustomed to cold cases that led nowhere. Most of the time, a discovery turned out to be civilian aircraft wreckage or misidentified military hardware from conflicts decades after World War II. This call felt different. Captain Mitchell, this is Detective Laurent Dubois with the Belgian Federal Police. We have aircraft wreckage that your database indicates belongs to a Lieutenant Robert Mitchell reported missing. September 1943. David's pen stopped moving across the requisition form. Mitchell wasn't an uncommon surname, but the timing made his chest tighten. His grandfather had been Robert Mitchell, Bobby to his friends, missing since 1943. Can you give me the details, Detective? Hikers found the wreckage yesterday in the Ardennes forest, about 40 kilometers southeast of Bastogne. Appears to be a P-51 Mustang, tail number 40. The registration traces to your agency. David pulled up the database on his computer, fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. The tail number populated a file he'd never seen before, marked with classification levels that required authorization above his clearance. Detective, I'm going to need to call you back. Can you secure the site? Already done, but Captain, there's something else. We found personal effects in the cockpit, a wallet, some photographs, and what appears to be military document. The wallet contains identification for Lieutenant Robert Mitchell. David stared at his computer screen, where his grandfather's military photograph looked back at him from a file marked Classified Historical Review Pending. I'll be on the next flight to Brussels, David said. After hanging up, David sat in his office at Dover Air Force Base, trying to process what he just learned. His grandfather's plane had been found. After 60 years, Bobby Mitchell was coming home, but something felt wrong about the location. David pulled out his personal files, the ones his grandmother had given him before she died 5 years earlier. The last letter from the War Department, dated October 15, 1943, stated that Lieutenant Mitchell had been lost during a reconnaissance mission over northern France. The search area had been concentrated around Amy, nearly 200 miles from where the wreckage was actually found. David opened his grandfather's personnel file from the family records. Bobby had been 24 when he disappeared, a fighter pilot with the married 8 months to David's grandmother, Sarah. No children yet. David's father wouldn't be born until 1946. A clean military death that qualified the family for benefits and gave them a folded flag to remember him by. But if Bobby had been flying a reconnaissance mission over Amy, what was his plane doing in the Belgian Ardennes? David picked up his phone and dialed Colonel Janet Thornton's direct line. As the head of Historical Records Review, she had access to classified files that might explain the discrepancy. Janet, it's David Mitchell. I need a favor. What kind of favor? My grandfather's plane was just found in Belgium. The location doesn't match his last known mission parameter. David, you know I can't discuss classified historical records even with family members. I'm not asking as family, I'm asking as the JPAC liaison, who's about to fly to Belgium to identify remains and recover a missing aircraft. If there are operational details that affect the investigation, I need to know them. Colonel Thornton was quiet for a moment. Send me the coordinates of the wreckage site. I'll see what I can find. And Janet, the database shows Bobby's file is under historical review. What does that mean? It means someone's been asking questions about Lieutenant Robert Mitchell, questions that require answers above my clearance level. David hung up and booked his flight to Brussels. As he packed his military identification and investigation materials, He kept thinking about his grandmother's stories. Sarah had always said Bobby was too good a pilot to get lost on a simple reconnaissance mission. She'd insisted something else had happened, something the military hadn't told them. For 60 years the family had assumed she was just processing grief. Now David wondered if she'd been right all along. The flight to Brussels gave David time to review everything he knew about his grandfather's service record. Bobby had joined the Army Air Forces in 1942, trained as a fighter pilot, and shipped to England in early. He'd flown 28 combat missions with the 357th Fighter Group before disappearing on what would have been his 29th. 28 successful missions suggested an experienced, competent pilot, not someone likely to get lost or make navigation errors that would put him too high. David's phone buzzed with a text from Colonel Thornton. File review complete. Can't discuss details over phone. When you return from Belgium, come see me immediately. There are things about your grandfather's last mission that aren't in the standard record. Detective Dubois met David at the crash site the next morning. The Belgian officer was in his 50s, methodical and thorough with the kind of patience that came from decades of police work. The hikers found it yesterday morning, Dubois explained as they walked through the dense forest. They were following an old trail when they noticed metal reflecting through the trees. The wreckage was more intact than David had expected. The P-51 had crashed nose first into a steep hillside, the impact driving the engine deep into the ground, but leaving the tail section and cockpit relatively preserved. 60 years of weather and forest growth had covered much of the aircraft, but the distinctive silhouette was unmistakable. No fire damage, David observed, walking around the site. That's unusual for a combat loss. The forensics team noticed that as well. Also, the bullet damage patterns are strange. Dubois led David to the aircraft's fuselage, pointing to a series of holes along the port side. These impacts came from below and behind, not from enemy fighters attacking from above or head-on. David knelt beside the wreckage, examining the bullet holes. His training in aircraft accident investigation had taught him to read impact patterns. These hits suggested the P-51 had been flying low, possibly pursuing or being pursued by ground forces. Detective, have you recovered the personal effects in evidence bags back at the station? But I can tell you what we found. Lieutenant Mitchell's wallet with military identification, 2 photographs, one of a young woman, one of what appears to be a military unit, and a sealed envelope containing documents. What kind of documents? We haven't opened the envelope. It's marked classified and appears to be in good condition despite 60 years in the elements. We thought it best to wait for military authorization. David felt his pulse quicken. If Bobby had been carrying classified documents, it suggested his mission was more than simple reconnaissance. Detective, I need to see everything, and I need to contact my superiors about those documents. As they walked back through the forest, David's mind raced through possibilities. His grandfather had been shot down while carrying classified materials 200 miles from his supposed mission area, by ground forces, rather than enemy fighters. Either Lieutenant Robert Mitchell had been involved in something far more significant than reconnaissance, or someone had been lying to his family for 60 years. The Belgian Federal Police Station, in Marchen Femmen, was a modern building that contrasted sharply with the medieval architecture of the surrounding town. Detective Dubois led David through a maze of corridors to the evidence room, where Bobby Mitchell's personal effects were laid out on a steel examination table. 60 years in a crashed aircraft had taken their toll, but the items were remarkably well preserved. The wallet was leather, cracked, but intact. The photographs were water-stained, but recognizable, and the sealed envelope appeared almost untouched, protected by what looked like military-grade waterproofing. The wallet contains standard military identification, Dubois explained, handing David a pair of evidence gloves. Lieutenant Robert Mitchell, blood type O positive. Also, a few personal items. David carefully examined his grandfather's military ID card. The photograph showed a young man with serious eyes, and the kind of determined expression common in wartime portraits. It was strange seeing Bobby's face for the first time, as a peer rather than through the lens of family mythology. The first photograph was of his grandmother Sarah, young and smiling, wearing a dress David recognized from family albums. The second photograph was more interesting. A group of military personnel standing in front of what appeared to be a British airfield. Bobby was in the center, but David didn't recognize the other faces. "This unit photo," David said, studying the image carefully. "These aren't all pilots. How can you tell the uniforms? Some are Army Air Forces, but others are different. British, maybe Free French. And this man here," David pointed to a figure in civilian clothes. "He's not military at all." Dubois made notes as David continued his examination. The implications were troubling. If Bobby had been photographed with an international group that included civilians, it suggested involvement in something beyond standard fighter operations. "Detective, I need to contact my superiors before we open that envelope. But first, can you tell me more about where exactly the aircraft was found?" Dubois pulled out a detailed topographical map of the Ardennes region. "Here," he said, marking an X in the dense forest southeast of Bastogne. "The location is significant because it's very remote. No roads, no settlements, just deep forest. If your grandfather was trying to reach Allied lines after being shot down, this would be an unusual route." David studied the map, comparing it to his knowledge of 1943 battle lines. In September 1943, this area was well behind German lines. If Bobby was flying reconnaissance over Amiens, he would have been heading west toward the coast, not southeast, into occupied Belgium, unless he wasn't flying reconnaissance, Dubois suggested. Before David could respond, his phone rang. Colonel Thornton's name appeared on the screen. "David, where are you with the investigation?" "At the Belgian police station examining personal effects." "Janet, I need authorization to open classified documents found at the crash site." "Negative. Do not open anything marked classified. I'm flying to Brussels tonight with a team from the Historical Review Board. We'll handle the documents." David felt a familiar frustration with military bureaucracy. "Colonel, I'm the assigned investigator for this case. If there are operational details that affect David, listen carefully. Your grandfather's file has been flagged for review by agencies above my clearance level. This isn't just about family curiosity anymore. There are national security implications." "What kind of implications?" "The kind that get people transferred to desk jobs in Alaska if they ask too many questions. Secure everything and wait for my team." After Thornton hung up, David stared at the sealed envelope on the evidence table. Whatever was inside had been important enough for Bobby to carry on his final mission, and significant enough to still warrant classification 60 years later. "Problems with your superiors?" Dubois asked. "Something like that. They want me to wait for a review team before proceeding." "Ah, bureaucracy the same in every country." Dubois leaned against the wall, studying David's expression. "But you're not the type to wait, are you?" David considered his options. Officially, he should secure everything and wait for Colonel Thornton's team. Unofficially, he was investigating his own grandfather's death and had legitimate authority as the JPAC liaison. "Detective, what do Belgian evidence procedures require for military documents? If they're found in Belgian territory, they fall under our jurisdiction until formally transferred to appropriate authorities, which could take days to arrange properly." David appreciated Dubois' diplomatic approach to international cooperation. "And if a Belgian investigator happened to examine those documents as part of a crash investigation, that would be within standard procedure." Dubois carefully opened the sealed envelope using evidence protocols. Inside were 3 items: a typewritten mission briefing marked "Eyes Only," a hand-drawn map with coordinates marked in pencil, and a list of names with what appeared to be German addresses. David photographed everything with his phone before reading the documents in detail. The mission briefing made his blood run cold. Operation Night Andale. Classification ultra-secret. Primary objective: extraction of high-value intelligence assets from German P facility. Secondary objective: destruction of facility to prevent reprisals. Flight route: modified to avoid radar detection. Pilot Lieutenant Robert Mitchell. Voluntary mission. Expendable asset classification. Authority combined. Chiefs of staff. Backup non-authorized. The hand-drawn map showed the crash site location marked as Extraction Point Alpha. The coordinates matched exactly where the aircraft had been found. The list of names included Allied officers reported as prisoners of war along with German camp locations. Several names were crossed out in red ink. Monder, Dubois whispered, reading over David's shoulder. Your grandfather was on a rescue mission. David felt the ground shift beneath everything he'd believed about Bobby's death. His grandfather hadn't been shot down during reconnaissance. He'd been flying a classified extraction mission to rescue Allied prisoners from a German camp. And according to the documents, it had been a suicide mission from the start. David's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Stop digging. Some secrets are buried for good reasons. A friend. He showed the message to Dubois, who frowned. Someone knows you're investigating. Someone knows I'm getting close to the truth. David took additional photographs of the documents, then carefully replaced them in the envelope. Whatever his grandfather had died trying to accomplish, it was significant enough that people were still watching 60 years later. Detective, I need to find the P camp Bobby was trying to reach. Can your records department help with historical German military installations in this region? Certainly. But Captain, if someone is monitoring your investigation, perhaps you should be careful about what you discover. David thought about the text message, about Colonel Thornton's warnings about the classified files that required authorization above her clearance level. Careful doesn't find the truth about why my grandfather died, and after 60 years, I think his family deserves to know what really happened on his last mission. As they left the evidence room, David couldn't shake the feeling that he was being drawn into something much larger than a simple crash investigation. His grandfather had died on a mission so secret, it remained classified 6 decades later. People were still watching, still protecting whatever Bobby had died trying to accomplish. The archives of the University of Louisa contained one of Europe's most comprehensive collections of World War II. Marie Vandenberg, the chief archivist, met David and Detective Dubois in a climate-controlled research room, lined with filing cabinets that stretched from floor to ceiling. German P facilities in the Ardennes region during 1943, she said, pulling several thick folders from a secured cabinet. We have documentation from Wehrmacht records, captured after the war, plus testimony from local resistance fighters and liberated prisoners. David spread Bobby's hand-drawn map on the research table, comparing the coordinates with Dr. Vandenberger's official record. The location his grandfather had marked as Extraction Point Alpha corresponded to an area the Germans had designated as Stalag, some old facility for captured Allied airmen. This camp is interesting, Dr. Vandenberg explained, pointing to a typed report in German. Unlike larger P facilities, 6 in Tevin-Burisee held fewer than 50 prisoners. But according to resistance reports, these were not ordinary captives. What made them different? Dubois asked. Intelligence officers, pilots who had been shot down while carrying sensitive information, men who knew things the Germans wanted to extract through interrogation. David felt pieces clicking together. So Bobby wasn't just rescuing random prisoners, he was extracting intelligence assets, who knew Allied secrets. It appears so, and look at this. Vandenberger produced a resistance report, dated September 15, 1943, just 2 weeks before Bobby's disappearance. The local underground reported unusual activity at 17C. German officers arriving from Berlin, specialized interrogation equipment being delivered. They were preparing for something, David realized, or someone was trying to prevent something, Dubois suggested. Dr. Vandenberger spread additional documents across the table. The camp was evacuated on September 30th. All prisoners were transferred to unknown location. No record exists of what happened to them. David checked Bobby's mission date against the evacuation timeline. His grandfather had attempted the extraction on September 28, 1943, just 2 days before the Germans emptied the camp. The timing can't be coincidental, David said. Bobby was trying to get those prisoners out before they could be transferred somewhere worse. His phone rang, interrupting the research session. Colonel Thornton's name appeared on the screen again. David, where are you? Following up on historical records related to the crash investigation. I told you to wait for my team. We're landing in Brussels in 3 hours. Janet, I found documentation about a German P facility near the crash site. I think Bobby was stopped right now. Whatever you think you found, you're dealing with information that remains sensitive to current operation. David stepped away from the research table, lowering his voice. Current operations. Janet, this happened 60 years ago. Some secrets don't have expiration dates. Meet me at the embassy. when I land. Bring everything you've collected and stop pursuing independent research." After hanging up, David returned to find Dr. Vandenberge and Detective Dubois examining a resistance fighter's personal diary from September 1943. "Captain, you need to see this entry," Dr. Vandenberge said, translating from French. September 28, 19 pilot attempted to reach camp, but was engaged by German patrol. Local fighters recovered pilot's body and buried him in forest. Germans searched for 3 days, but found nothing. David's heart pounded. Bobby made it to the ground alive. According to this account, yes, the resistance fighter writes that the pilot spoke English, carried American identification, and had detailed knowledge of the camp layout. Dubois leaned forward. "What happened to the body?" Dr. Vandenberge continued translating. "The resistance buried him with military honors in a marked grave. But here's the interesting part. The pilot gave them something before he died. A list of names and a message to pass to Allied intelligence. What was the message? Tell them the Nightingales are flying into a trap. The Germans know about extraction protocols." David felt cold certainty settle in his stomach. Bobby hadn't just died attempting a rescue mission. He died trying to warn Allied intelligence that their secret operations had been compromised. Dr. Vandenberge, does the diary mention what happened to this list of names? The resistance fighter says he passed it to a British intelligence officer, who contacted him 3 days later, but the British officer wasn't who he claimed to be. What do you mean? The man spoke perfect English and carried proper identification, but he asked questions no Allied officer should have known to ask. The resistance fighter suspected he was a German spy using captured credentials. David's phone buzzed with another anonymous text. "Your grandfather died protecting secrets that could still get people killed. Stop while you can still walk away." He showed the message to Dubois, who frowned. "Someone really doesn't want you learning the truth, or they don't want me learning who betrayed the truth." David replied. Dr. Vandenberge had continued reading the diary. "There's more. The resistance fighter mentions that several other Allied extraction missions failed around the same time, always the same pattern. Precise German responses, as if they knew exactly when and where the missions would occur. Someone on the Allied side was feeding information to the Germans." David concluded. "And your grandfather discovered it," Dubois added. "That's why his mission was classified as expendable asset. Someone wanted him to die rather than return with evidence of betrayal." David thought about the implications. Bobby hadn't been killed by random enemy action. He'd been sent on a suicide mission by someone who knew he was carrying information that could expose a traitor in Allied intelligence. Dr. Vandenberge, do you have any records of who authorized Bobby's mission? "The documents I found were signed by combined chiefs of staff, but that could mean anyone. I can research authorization records, but it will take time. And Captain, if what you suspect is true, the people responsible for your grandfather's death might still have influence in current intelligence agencies." David's phone rang again. This time the caller ID showed unknown. "Captain Mitchell." The voice was elderly, American with a slight tremor of age. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Frank Henley. I was a prisoner at Stalag 17C in September 1943. I've been waiting 60 years for someone to ask the right questions about what happened to the pilot who tried to save us." David gestured for silence from his companions. "Mr. Henley, where are you?" "Belgium. I came as soon as I heard about the plane being found." "Captain, your grandfather was a hero who died trying to warn Allied command about a traitor in their ranks, but the wrong people got his message first. Can you meet with me?" "Already am. I'm in the hotel lobby downstairs. And Captain, I brought the list of names your grandfather died protecting. It's time the truth came out." David looked at Detective Dubois and Dr. Vanden. In the space of 2 hours, he discovered that his grandfather had died on a betrayed mission trying to save prisoners from a compromised camp, carrying intelligence about Allied security breaches. And now one of those prisoners was waiting downstairs with evidence that had been hidden for Dr. Vandenberge, can you secure copies of everything we've found? "Of course, but Captain, be careful. If your grandfather's mission was betrayed by Allied intelligence, the people responsible may still be protecting that secret." As they prepared to leave the archives, David realized he was no longer just investigating a crash. He was uncovering a conspiracy that had cost his grandfather's life and potentially compromised Allied operations during World War II. The question was whether he could expose the truth before the same people who killed Bobby decided that his grandson had learned too much. Frank Henley was waiting in the hotel lobby, a man in his late 90s, with clear eyes and the bearing of someone who had survived things that would break most people. When he saw David, he smiled with recognition that transcended decades. "You look just like him," Frank said, standing with the aid of a wooden cane. Bobby talked about his family constantly, said he was going to have children someday who would know their grandfather died for something that mattered. Frank Henley's hotel room overlooked the cobblestone streets of Marchionfeuille, but his attention was focused on a worn leather portfolio that had clearly been treasured for decades. Detective Dubois had joined them, understanding that this conversation would require official witness. "I've carried this for 60 years, Frank said, opening the portfolio with careful hands. "Your grandfather made me promise that if I survived the war, I would keep these documents safe until someone came asking the right question." Inside the portfolio were original papers in Bobby's handwriting, along with what appeared to be German documents and a detailed map of the P camp. "Bobby didn't die in the plane crash," Frank began, settling into his chair. "The P-51 went down about half a mile from the camp, but he survived the impact. We heard the crash from our barracks and saw German patrols rushing toward the sound." David leaned forward. "How do you know what happened to him?" "Because 2 hours later he was inside our compound." "Inside the camp?" "How?" Frank smiled grimly. "Your grandfather was one hell of a pilot, but he was also one hell of a soldier. He'd memorized the camp layout from intelligence reports, studied German patrol patterns, and somehow managed to infiltrate a heavily guarded P facility." Dubois made notes while Frank continued his account. "Bobby found me around midnight on September 28th. I was the ranking Allied officer among the prisoners, so he came to me first. He explained that he was there to extract specific intelligence officers who had knowledge of German code-breaking operations." "Which officers?" Frank pulled out a list written in Bobby's neat handwriting. "Lieutenant Commander James Hartwell, Royal Navy cryptographer. Captain Ernst Miller, Free French Intelligence Liaison. Flight Lieutenant William Page, RAF Photo, Reconnaissance Specialist. And me, I was Army Signal Corps specializing in German radio intercepts." David studied the list. "You all had intelligence about German operations. More than that, we all had knowledge of how the Germans were intercepting Allied communications. Captain, the reason we were in that special camp wasn't because we were valuable prisoners, it was because we'd all discovered the same thing," which was Frank's expression, dark. "Someone in Allied intelligence was feeding the Germans our radio frequencies, our code protocols, and our mission details. We'd each figured out pieces of the puzzle from different angles, and the Germans needed to know exactly how much we'd learned." Dubois looked up from his note. "So the camp was an interrogation facility?"
"Worse than that. It was where the Germans brought Allied intelligence officers who had stumbled onto the fact that their own side was compromised. They needed to extract every detail about what we knew and who we might have told." David felt the scope of the conspiracy expanding. Bobby wasn't just rescuing prisoners. He was extracting witnesses to Allied intelligence betrayal. Exactly. And he almost succeeded. Frank pulled out Bobby's hand-drawn map of the camp, annotated with escape routes and guard positions. Your grandfather had done his homework. He knew about a drainage tunnel that led from the camp kitchen to a culvert outside the perimeter fence. The plan was to extract us, one at a time, over 3 nights. What went wrong? The same thing that had gone wrong with every other Allied intelligence operation in that sector. The Germans were waiting for us. Frank's voice grew heavy with old anger. Bobby had started moving Lieutenant Commander Hartwell through the drainage tunnel when German guards surrounded both ends. They'd known about the escape route, known about the timing, known exactly where to position their forces. David's phone buzzed with another anonymous text. "Meeting with old prisoners is dangerous for your health. Some veterans don't understand operational security." He showed the message to Frank and Dubois. Frank read it and laughed bitterly. 60 years later, and they're still trying to cover it up. "Who's they, Mr. Henley?" The people who sent your grandfather on a suicide mission to eliminate witnesses to their betrayal. The same people who classified his records, so no one would ever investigate what really happened. Frank pulled out a German document from his portfolio. Bobby gave me this before the guards found him. It's a copy of a German intelligence report dated September 27, 1943, one day before Bobby's mission. Dubois examined the document. It's in German, but I can make out some details. Radio intercepts, mission schedules, personnel assignments. Bobby had found that document in the camp commandant's office during his infiltration. Frank explained it proved that the Germans had detailed advanced knowledge of Allied operations, including the exact timing and personnel assignments for extraction missions. David studied the German report. Even without reading German, he could see Allied unit designations, radio frequencies, and what appeared to be mission times. This is intelligence that could only have come from someone with high-level access to Allied operations. David realized Bobby thought so too. That's why he was so determined to get this evidence back to Allied command even after the extraction failed. What happened to him? Frank's voice grew quiet. The German guards captured Hartwell and Bobby in the drainage tunnel around. They were brought back to the camp and taken to the commandant's office for immediate interrogation. Frank paused, clearly struggling with painful memories. I was in a barracks that faced the administrative building. Through the window, I could see lights in the common office all night. Around dawn, I saw German soldiers carrying something wrapped in a tarp toward the motor pool. Bobby, I believe so. But Captain, here's what the official records won't tell you. Before the guards found him, your grandfather managed to complete one part of his mission. Frank reached into his portfolio and pulled out a small cloth bundle. Inside was a military radio transmitter, compact but sophisticated for 1943 technology. Bobby carried this with him to maintain contact with Allied intelligence during the extraction. Before he was captured, he transmitted everything he'd discovered about the German intelligence documents and the compromised Allied operations. David examined the radio equipment. Who did he transmit to? That's where the story gets interesting. Bobby was supposed to be in radio contact with a British intelligence officer named Blackbird. But when Bobby tried to warn Blackbird about the German intelligence documents, the response he received proved that Blackbird was the source of the leak. Frank pulled out Bobby's final handwritten note. Your grandfather wrote this during his last radio transmission. He'd discovered that Blackbird was feeding the Germans information about Allied operations, including the extraction mission that was supposed to save us. David read Bobby's note. Blackbird compromised. Germans have full knowledge extraction protocols. Mission betrayed from inside. German intelligence documents prove Allied radio frequencies compromised. Blackbird is feeding them operational detail. If I don't survive, investigate all missions authorized through Blackbird channel - Lieutenant R. Mitchell. Final transmission, 0245 hours 28th, September 1943. Mr. Henley, who was Blackbird? Frank's expression was grim. Someone with enough authority to authorize secret missions and enough access to classify the results when those missions failed. Someone who could arrange for your grandfather's records to remain buried for 60 years. David's phone rang. Colonel Thornton again. David, I'm at the embassy. You need to get here immediately and bring any materials you've collected. Janet, I found evidence that Bobby's mission was compromised by Allied intelligence. Someone summed. Blackbird was. Stop talking. Stop investigating. Get here now. That's a direct order. After hanging up, David looked at Frank Henley, who was watching him with understanding. Your colonel doesn't want you learning about Blackbird, Frank observed. Why would that still matter 60 years later? Because some secrets don't die with the people who kept them, Frank said, and because the people who inherited those secrets have been protecting them ever since. David realized he was facing the same choice his grandfather had faced 60 years earlier. Follow orders and let the truth stay buried, or risk everything to expose a conspiracy that had cost Allied. Frank Henley leaned forward. Captain, I'm 97 years old. I've kept your grandfather's secret for 6 decades, waiting for someone brave enough to honor his sacrifice by finishing what he started. What did he start? Exposing the people who betrayed Allied intelligence operations for their own purposes. Your grandfather died trying to save not just us prisoners, but every Allied soldier whose missions were being compromised by traitors in their own command structure. David looked at the evidence spread across the hotel room table. Documents proving Allied intelligence betrayal, German reports showing advanced knowledge of secret operations, and Bobby's final transmission identifying the source of the leak. Mr. Henley, will you testify to what you've told me? I've been waiting 60 years for someone to ask. Outside the hotel window, David noticed two men in dark suits, standing across the street watching the building entrance. Someone was definitely monitoring his investigation. The U.S. Embassy in Brussels was a fortress of glass and steel, but David felt more like he was entering a trap than a sanctuary. Colonel Thornton met him in the lobby, with two men he didn't recognize. Older, gray-haired, with the kind of bearing that suggested intelligence backgrounds rather than regular military. David, these are Dr. William Stone and Mr. Richard Hayes, from the State Department's Historical Classification Review Board, Thornton said, her tone carefully neutral. They need to discuss your investigation.
Dr. Stone gestured toward a secure conference room. Captain Mitchell, we understand you've been conducting research into your grandfather's mission. We're here to help clarify some historical details that may have caused confusion. David carried Frank Henley's portfolio, but he'd left copies of everything with Detective Dubois as insurance. I found evidence that my grandfather's mission was compromised by someone named Blackbird. The two State Department officials exchanged glances. Hayes leaned forward. Captain, you've stumbled into information related to ongoing intelligence operations. What you've interpreted as historical betrayal was actually part of authorized counterintelligence activities. Counterintelligence. Dr. Stone opened a classified folder. Operation Nightingale was a complex deception operation designed to feed false information to German intelligence. Your grandfather was aware that his mission would appear to fail, but the real objective was to convince the Germans that their intelligence sources were more valuable than they actually were. David felt the room shift around him. You're saying Bobby knew it was a deception operation? Lieutenant Mitchell volunteered for a mission that required appearing to be captured while carrying false intelligence. The betrayal you've discovered was actually the successful completion of a counterintelligence operation that saved thousands of Allied lives. Hayes produced additional documents. The prisoners at Stellig 17C were part of the operation. They carried false information designed to mislead German couriers about Allied communication protocol. David thought about Frank Henley's account, Bobby's final transmission, the German documents proving advanced knowledge of Allied operations. That's not what the evidence shows. Evidence can be misinterpreted without proper context, Dr. Stone said smoothly. Your grandfather was a hero who died completing a successful mission. The classification was necessary to protect the operational methods that continued to be used throughout the war. Colonel Thornton had remained silent during the exchange, but David could see tension in her expression. David, these gentlemen have full authority over historical classification matters. Your investigation needs to be transferred to their jurisdiction. David opened Frank Henley's portfolio. I have Bobby's final radio transmission. His own words identifying Blackbird as a compromised intelligence source. Hayes examined Bobby's handwritten note. Captain, your grandfather was maintaining cover even in his final transmission. The identification of Blackbird as compromised was part of the deception operation designed to convince German interceptors that their source had been discovered, and the German documents Bobby found proving Allied operations were compromised. False intelligence, planted by Allied counterintelligence, to make the Germans believe their information was more valuable than it actually was. Dr. Stone closed the classified folder. Captain, every piece of evidence you've discovered supports the conclusion that Operation Nightingale was a successful deception operation. Your grandfather died a hero, completing a mission that protected Allied lives. David stared at the two officials, recognizing the polished efficiency of a well-rehearsed cover story. Everything had an explanation. Every piece of evidence could be reinterpreted to support their narrative. What about Frank Henley's testimony? He was there. He saw what happened. Hayes smiled sympathetically. Mr. Henley was 97 years old and had been a prisoner of war under extreme stress. Memory can be unreliable,
especially when filtered through decades of speculation about events he didn't fully understand at the time. He has documents, Bobby's radio equipment, German intelligence reports, all consistent with a deception operation. Captain, we understand your desire to honor your grandfather's memory, but you're in danger of misinterpreting a successful intelligence operation as evidence of betrayal. David's phone buzzed with a text from Detective Dubois. Hotel room searched after you left. Henley moved to secure location. Documents safe. The officials noticed his phone. Dr. Stone leaned forward. Captain, we need you to understand that pursuing this investigation further could compromise current intelligence operations. There are national security implications to making these historical details public. What kind of implications? Hayes exchanged another glance with Dr. Stone. The methods used in Operation Nightingale formed the basis for intelligence protocols still in use today. Public revelation of those methods could compromise ongoing operations and endanger current assets. Colonel Thornton finally spoke. David, these gentlemen are offering you a choice. Accept the official explanation for your grandfather's mission and receive recognition for his heroic service, or continue pursuing an investigation that could result in charges for compromising classified information. David felt the weight of 60 years of secrecy pressing down on him. The official story was clean, heroic, and gave his family the recognition they'd always wanted. The truth was messy, dangerous, and might never be fully provable. I need time to consider. Dr. Stone shook his head. Captain, time is a luxury we don't have. Your investigation has already attracted attention from parties who have their own interests in keeping certain historical details buried. What parties? Foreign intelligence services, who would benefit from understanding how Allied counterintelligence operated during the war. Your research has been noted by people who don't share our interest in protecting American operations. Hayes produced a formal document. We're prepared to offer you a commendation for your grandfather's service, full military honors for his burial, and a substantial settlement for your family's years of uncertainty about his fate. In exchange for all materials related to your investigation, your agreement to accept the official explanation for Operation Nightingale, and your cooperation in debriefing sessions to ensure no classified information has been compromised. David studied the settlement offer. It was generous, patriotic, and would give his family everything they'd wanted for.
It was also a bribe to stop investigating the truth about Bobby's death. What happens if I refuse? The room grew cold. Dr. Stone's sympathetic expression hardened. Captain, you've already obtained classified information without proper authorization. You've conducted unauthorized research into ongoing intelligence operations. You've compromised operational security by sharing classified details with foreign nationals. Any of those charges could result in court-martial and imprisonment. Hayes added, your military career would end. Your family would be disgraced, and your grandfather's memory would be tainted by association with your criminal activity. Colonel Thornton looked uncomfortable, but didn't contradict the threats. David thought about Frank Henley, 97 years old, and still fighting for justice, about Bobby's final transmission warning of betrayal, about the surveillance teams and anonymous threats. I need to speak with my attorney before making any decisions. Dr. Stone stood. Captain, we're offering you 24 hours to consider our proposal. After that, the offer is withdrawn, and the investigation proceeds under different circumstances. What does that mean? Hayes's smile was cold. It means that sometimes investigations end with unfortunate accidents. Your grandfather discovered that pursuing certain truths can be hazardous to one's health. As David left the embassy, he realized he was facing the same choice Bobby had faced 60 years earlier. Accept the official story and live safely, or pursue the truth and risk everything. The difference was that Bobby had made his choice, knowing the consequences. David was just beginning to understand how dangerous the truth could be. Outside the embassy, Detective Dubois was waiting in an unmarked car. Captain, we need to talk. Miss Henley has information about Blackbird that changes everything. David got into the car knowing he was crossing a line that would make him either a hero like his grandfather or another casualty of a secret too dangerous to reveal. What did Frank tell you? Blackbird wasn't just feeding information to the Germans during the war, Dubois said, starting the engine. According to Henley, Blackbird survived the war
and continued operating in Allied intelligence for decades afterward. David felt cold certainty settle in his stomach. You're saying Blackbird is still alive, was still alive as of 10 years ago, when someone began systematically eliminating the remaining prisoners from Stalag 7. Frank Henley is the last survivor. As they drove through Brussels, David realized that Bobby's mission hadn't ended with his death in 1943. The conspiracy he died trying to expose was still active, still protecting itself, still eliminating threats to its survival. The safe house was a farmhouse 20 kilometers outside Brussels, arranged through Detective Dubois' contacts in the Belgian intelligence service. Frank Henley sat at a wooden kitchen table looking frailer than he had that morning, but with eyes that burned with decades of suppressed anger. They offered you the hero's story, didn't they? Frank asked. As David entered, your grandfather died completing a successful mission classified for national security. Everyone gets medals and settlements. How did you know? Because they've been telling that same story for every time someone gets close to the truth about Blackbird, they offer the same deal. Accept the lie and live comfortably, or pursue the truth and face the consequences. Detective Dubois spread documents across the kitchen table. Mr. Henley has been tracking this for decades. Show him what you found, Frank. Frank opened a different portfolio, this one containing newspaper clippings, obituaries, and what appeared to be accident reports. After the war, 7 of us survived Stalag 7. We stayed in contact, compared notes, tried to piece together what really happened. David examined the clippings. What did you find? A pattern. Every few years, one of the survivors would die in what appeared to be an accident. Car crashes, falls, heart attacks, house fires, always explainable, always just unfortunate enough to avoid suspicion. Frank pulled out a timeline he'd meticulously maintained. Lieutenant Commander Hartwell died in 1953. Car accident in London. Captain Miller died in 1961. Fell downstairs at his home in Paris. Flight Lieutenant Page died in 1968. Heart attack during a routine medical exam. That could be coincidental, David said, though he didn't believe it. Vincent Torres died in 1984. Gas leak explosion at his house in California. Walter Briggs died in 1997. Drowning accident while fishing alone. Each death occurred within months of that survivor attempting to publish memoirs or contact military historians. Detective Dubois pointed to the most recent entry on Frank's timeline. Ernest Kellerman, 2014, the last survivor besides Frank. What happened to him? Frank's voice grew quiet. Ernie contacted me in 2013, said he'd found new evidence about Blackbird's identity. He'd been researching Allied intelligence archives that had been declassified after the Cold War ended. What kind of evidence? Frank pulled out photocopies of military personnel records. Ernie discovered that Blackbird wasn't just a code name, it was the operational alias for a specific intelligence officer who had access to all Allied communication protocols and mission authorizations. David studied the personnel record. They were heavily redacted, but he could make out service dates, assignment locations, and partial names. The officer using the Blackbird alias was assigned to coordinate intelligence operations between American, British, and Free French forces. He had access to everything: radio frequencies, extraction protocols, agent identities, mission times, and he was feeding it all to the Germans. Not for ideology, Frank said. For money. Ernie found evidence that the Blackbird officer was being paid by German intelligence through Swiss bank accounts. It wasn't about Nazi sympathies, it was about personal profit. Detective Dubois examined the financial records. These bank transactions continued after the war, and that's the key detail, Frank explained. The payments didn't stop in 1945. They continued through the 1950s, 1960s, and beyond. Blackbird didn't just betray Allied operations during the war. He sold intelligence secrets throughout the Cold War. David felt the scope of the conspiracy expanding. You're saying this person continued operating as a double agent for decades? Triple agent, actually. Selling American secrets to the Soviets, Soviet secrets to the Americans, and playing all sides for personal profit. The perfect position for someone with high-level intelligence access. Frank pulled out the final document from his portfolio. Ernie's last communication to me sent 3 days before he died. He'd identified Blackbird. David read the handwritten note. Frank found him. Blackbird, real name Major William Garrett. later promoted colonel, then Pentagon intelligence liaison, still alive, still active as of 2013, has been protecting his wartime activities by eliminating witnesses. Your grandfather died because Garrett couldn't risk exposure. We're all target. If something happens to me, the evidence is in Safety Deposit Box 347, First National Bank of Richmond, Virginia. Key hidden behind loose brick in my basement wall. Third row from bottom, east side. Ernie, did you find Ernie's evidence? Frank nodded grimly. I drove to Richmond after his funeral. Found the key exactly where he said. The safety deposit box contained 60 years of documentation proving that William Garrett was Blackbird. What kind of documentation? Frank spread additional papers across the table. Bank records, showing payments from German, Soviet, and other intelligence services. Copies of classified documents Garrett sold to foreign powers. Most importantly, communication records proving that Garrett was the source of the intelligence leaks that compromised Allied operations. David examined the bank record.
The amounts were staggering. Millions of dollars paid over decades to an account registered under various aliases, all traceable to William Garrett. Frank, is this William Garrett still alive? As of last year, yes. He's 94, living in a private care facility in Arlington, Virginia. Still has connections in the intelligence community, still protected by people who depend on his secrets staying buried. Detective Dubois had been making notes. This explains the embassy official's reaction. If Garrett is still alive and still has influence, he could arrange for David's investigation to be shut down. David's phone buzzed with a text from Colonel Thornton. Your 24-hour deadline has been moved up. Report to embassy immediately for final decision. Frank saw the message and reached for David's arm. Captain, they're not going to give you 24 hours. If Garrett knows you found this evidence, he'll act to protect himself. What do you mean? I mean that Ernest Kellerman died within hours of finding Garrett's identity. Vincent Torres died the day after he contacted a military historian. Your grandfather died because he transmitted evidence about Blackbird's betrayal. David felt the weight of realization. They're going to kill me regardless of what I decide. Unless you act first, Frank said. Your grandfather died trying to get this evidence to the right people. You have the chance to finish what he started. Detective Dubois leaned forward. Captain, Belgian authorities can offer protection, but only if you formally request asylum and provide evidence of threats to your safety. David thought about his career, his family, his life in America. All of it would be forfeit if he chose to expose Garrett and the 60-year conspiracy. Frank, what would Bobby want me to do? The old man smiled sadly. Your grandfather believed that some truths are worth dying for, but he also believed that some truths are worth living for. The question is whether you're willing to spend the rest of your life making sure this secret doesn't die with us. David's phone rang. Colonel Thornton. David, where are you? Dr. Stone and Mr. Hayes are asking about your decision. Janet, I need you to answer one question honestly. Do you know who William Garrett is? Silence on the other end, then quietly. David, stop asking questions and get to the embassy, please, for your own safety. After hanging up, David realized that even Colonel Thornton was afraid of Garrett's reach. Frank, if I expose this, what happens to you? I'm 97 years old, Captain. I've been living on borrowed time for decades, but you're young enough to see justice done and survive to make sure it sticks. Detective Dubois gathered the documents. We can arrange secure transport to multiple international destinations. Once you're clear of American jurisdiction, you can release this information to global media outlets simultaneously. David looked at the evidence spread across the farmhouse table. 60 years of proof that an American intelligence officer had betrayed Allied operations, caused the deaths of countless soldiers, and continued selling secrets throughout the Cold War. His grandfather had died trying to stop William Garrett. Now David had the chance to finish that mission. Frank, are you willing to testify publicly about everything you've told me? I've been waiting 60 years for someone to ask. David made his decision. Detective Dubois, I formally request protective custody and asylum under Belgian law. I have evidence of ongoing criminal conspiracy by American intelligence officials and credible threats to my safety. As Dubois began making official calls, David thought about Bobby's final transmission. If I don't survive, investigate all missions authorized through Blackbird Channel. Mission finally authorized. The secure communications room in the Belgian Federal Police headquarters buzzed with activity
as Detective Dubois coordinated with international law enforcement agencies. David sat before an encrypted video link speaking with investigative journalists from the Washington Post, BBC and Lemon simultaneously. "We need independent verification of all documentation before publication," said Sarah Chen, the Post's national security correspondent. "These are extraordinary allegations against a senior intelligence official." Frank Henley, despite his age, spoke with clarity and precision as he detailed 60 years of evidence. Mr. Garrett didn't just betray wartime operations. According to the financial records Ernest Kellerman compiled, he sold strategic intelligence throughout the Korean War, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the Vietnam conflict. The BBC correspondent James Morrison leaned forward on screen. "Mr. Henley, you're alleging that a single American officer compromised major Cold War operations for personal profit." "Not alleging, proving. We have bank records, communication intercepts, and documentation of the systematic elimination of witnesses who could expose his activity." David spread Garrett's financial records before the camera. "These Swiss bank account statements show payments totaling over $40 million in current value received from German, Soviet, Chinese and other intelligence services. Detective Dubois entered the room with an urgent expression. "Captain, we have a problem. The American embassy has filed formal extradition requests through multiple diplomatic channels. They're claiming you've stolen classified materials and represent a flight risk." The French journalist from Lyon, Dr. Marie Dubois, spoke from her screen. "This suggests the allegations have merit. The Americans wouldn't pursue extradition so aggressively unless they're trying to suppress genuinely damaging information." David's secure phone rang. Colonel Thornton's name appeared. "David, please listen carefully. Dr. Stone and Mr. Hayes are no longer handling your case. It's been escalated to agencies I can't identify. You need to understand that you're dealing with people who have unlimited resources and no accountability." "Janet, are you calling to warn me or threaten me?" "I'm calling because I've seen your grandfather's actual service record, the one that's been sealed above my clearance level for 20 years. David Bobby wasn't just investigating Blackbird. He was working with a group of Allied intelligence officers who suspected high-level penetration of their operations." David felt pieces clicking together. "You're saying Bobby was part of a counterintelligence investigation?" "I'm saying your grandfather was one of several Allied officers who died suspiciously after getting too close to identifying Blackbird. The pattern Frank Henley documented didn't start after the war. It started during the war." Frank leaned toward the phone. "Colonel, how many other Allied officers died investigating Blackbird?" "According to the sealed records, at least 12 between 1943 and 1945, all listed as combat losses or accidents, but all had been asking questions about compromised operations in their sector." Sarah Chen interrupted from Washington. "Colonel Thornton, are you willing to go on record with this information?" "I'm willing to go on record with the fact that Lieutenant Robert Mitchell's file has been classified by agencies that don't want their World War II activities examined. That should tell you everything you need to know about the credibility of Captain Mitchell's investigation." After Thornton hung up, David realized the scope of Garrett's protection network. Not only had Blackbird operated as a double agent for decades, but he'd maintained the power to classify evidence of his activities and eliminate threats to his exposure. The video conference continued for 3 hours with each journalist independently verifying aspects of Frank's documentation. By evening they had established a coordinated publication schedule, designed to prevent suppression of the story. "We'll publish simultaneously across all platforms tomorrow morning." Sarah Chen confirmed full documentation will be released digitally to prevent selective editing or suppression. As the journalists signed off, Detective Dubois received an urgent call from his superiors. "Captain, Belgian authorities have agreed to provide protective custody, but there are complications. The Americans are claiming you've committed espionage and are requesting immediate extradition under NATO mutual defense agreements." "What does that mean?" "It means we can protect you for now, but if the Americans escalate to formal terrorism charges, Belgian law requires us to consider extradition." David's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from an unknown sender. "Secure location compromised. Garrett's people know where you are. Move immediately. A friend." Frank read the message and struggled to his feet. "Captain, we need to leave. If Garrett has people inside Belgian law enforcement, this building isn't safe." Detective Dubois checked his weapon and radio. "I'll arrange transport to a different facility." "But Captain, you need to understand that if Garrett has the resources to track you in Belgium, He has the resources to reach you anywhere. As they prepared to leave, David's laptop chimed with an incoming video call. The caller ID showed William Garrett. Frank went pale. "Don't answer." David stared at the screen. "After 60 years, Blackbird wanted to talk. I have to take this. We need to know what he's planning." David accepted the call. The screen showed an elderly man in what appeared to be a luxury apartment, with the kind of sharp intelligence in his eyes that age hadn't diminished. "Captain Mitchell, I believe you have something that belongs to me." "Miss Garrett, I have evidence that you've been committing treason for over 60 years. Garrett smiled.
Treason is such an outdated concept, don't you think? I've been serving the cause of peace by ensuring that no single nation becomes too dominant in global affairs. Your grandfather couldn't understand the larger picture. My grandfather understood that you were getting Allied soldiers killed for money. Your grandfather was an idealistic boy who stumbled into affairs beyond his comprehension, just as you have." Frank leaned into the camera view. "Hello, William. I told you 60 years ago that someday you'd pay for what you did to those men." Garrett's expression hardened. Frank Henley, still alive, still making trouble. "I'd hoped natural causes would resolve that problem by now. Sorry to disappoint you, but I lived long enough to see justice done." Garrett's smile returned. "Justice is a luxury for people who don't understand how the world really works. Captain Mitchell, you have 1 hour to destroy all materials related to your investigation and report to the American Embassy for debriefing. Or what? Or I demonstrate why I've survived 60 years in a business where most people don't last 60 days. You're not dealing with some doddering old veteran, Captain. You're dealing with someone who has spent decades building networks that span multiple intelligence agencies and government." David felt cold certainty. "You're threatening to have me killed. I'm informing you that pursuing this course of action will have consequences you're not prepared for. Your grandfather learned that lesson too late. Don't repeat his mistake." The call ended, leaving David staring at a blank screen. Frank put a hand on his shoulder. "Captain, that man has been threatening people for 60 years, but he's never faced someone with modern communication technology and international law enforcement support." Detective Dubois was already coordinating with his team. "We're moving to a secure facility outside Belgian jurisdiction. Once the story publishes tomorrow, Garrett's ability to suppress it will be severely limited." David gathered the evidence files. "Frank, are you sure you want to see this through? Garrett just threatened both of us directly." The old man smiled. "Captain, I'm 97 years old. William Garrett has been trying to kill me for decades. At this point, it's become a matter of professional pride to outlive the bastard." As they prepared to leave the building, David realized he was no longer just investigating his grandfather's death. He was completing a mission that had been ongoing for 60 years, bringing a traitor to justice who had hidden behind classification levels and government protection. Tomorrow morning, the world would learn about Blackbird, and William Garrett's 60-year secret would finally be exposed. The abandoned NATO communications facility outside Liege had been closed since the Cold War ended, but its secure bunkers and encrypted communication systems remained functional. Detective Dubois had arranged access through Belgian military intelligence, creating what he hoped would be an untraceable sanctuary until morning. David established encrypted communication links with the international journalists, while Frank Henley organized 60 years of evidence into a comprehensive timeline. The publication was scheduled for 0600 GMT, less than 8 hours. The Washington Post confirms they have independent verification of the Swiss bank records, David reported. BBC has corroborated the timeline of survivor deaths. Leon has connected Garrett's activities to compromised French resistance operations. Frank looked up from his document. "We're missing one crucial piece: proof of Garrett's current activities and ongoing influence." "What do you mean?" "William Garrett didn't just betray operations during the war and Cold War. If he's still alive and still threatening people, it means he's still active. We need evidence of his recent activities to prove this isn't just historical misconduct." Detective Dubois entered the communications room with an urgent expression. "We have a problem. Belgian intelligence reports unusual activity at multiple American facilities in Europe. Military aircraft movements. Embassy security increases. Intelligence personnel being recalled from various postings." David felt dread building. "They're coordinating a response." "It appears so, but there's something else. We've intercepted communications, suggesting that Garrett's protection network extends beyond American intelligence. There are indications that European agencies
are also involved in covering up his activities. Frank studied the intelligence reports. That makes sense. If Garrett was selling secrets to multiple governments for 60 years, all of those governments have an interest in keeping his activities hidden. David's encrypted phone rang. Sarah Chen from the Washington Post. Captain Mitchell, we have a development. Our investigation team has discovered that William Garrett didn't retire from intelligence activities in the 1980s, as officially recorded. According to sources in the Pentagon, he continued operating as a consultant and liaison until at least 20. What kind of consultant? Facilitating intelligence, sharing agreements between NATO allies and former Soviet states. Essentially, he's been in a position to monitor and influence international intelligence cooperation for decades. After his supposed retirement, Frank leaned toward the phone. That means Garrett has had access to current intelligence operations and modern communication technologies. He's not just protecting 60-year-old secrets, he's protecting ongoing activities. Exactly. And there's more. We've found evidence that several high-profile intelligence failures over the past 20 can be traced to compromised operations that Garrett had oversight responsibility for. David felt the scope expanding again. You're saying he's still actively betraying intelligence operations. We're saying that William Garrett has been the common factor in multiple intelligence failures, spanning 7 decades. Whether through active betrayal or criminal negligence, he's cost thousands of lives and compromised countless operations. After hanging up, David realized they weren't just exposing historical crimes. They were revealing ongoing national security threats that multiple governments had been covering up to protect their own complicity in Garrett's activities. Detective Dubois received another urgent communication. Captain, we have immediate security concerns.
American Special Operations teams have been deployed to European locations. Official explanation is counterterrorism exercises, but the timing suggests they're looking for you. Frank struggled to his feet. They're going to try to take us before publication. David checked the secure communication links. 4 hours until publication. Can we hold this position? Not if they're using military assets. This facility's location will eventually be compromised. David made a decision. We need to split up. Frank, you take half the evidence and go with Detective Dubois to a different location. I'll stay here and maintain communication with the journalists. Captain, that's suicide. If they capture you, they'll torture you for information about evidence locations and media contacts. Frank, you're 97 years old. You can't run from special operations teams, but you can hide with evidence until publication. If they get me, the story still goes public. Frank grabbed David's arm. Your grandfather died trying to complete this mission. I won't let his grandson die finishing it. Frank, Bobby died because he was alone and had no backup. We have international media coordination, law enforcement protection, and evidence distributed across multiple locations. Even if they stop us, they can't stop the story. Detective Dubois was monitoring multiple communication channels. Gentlemen, we don't have time for debate. American forces are moving toward this region. We need to evacuate immediately. David's laptop chimed with another incoming video call. William Garrett again. Don't answer, Frank warned. David accepted the call. Garrett appeared on screen, but this time he wasn't alone. 2 younger men in suits flanked him, and the background suggested he was no longer in his apartment. Captain Mitchell, I gave you an opportunity to resolve this situation peacefully. You chose to escalate. Mr. Garrett, in 3 hours, the world will know everything about your 60 years of treason. Will they? Are you certain your media contacts are still alive to publish anything? David felt cold terror. What are you talking about? One of the men beside Garrett whispered something in his ear. Garrett nodded. Sarah Chen has been detained by FBI on charges of handling stolen classified materials. James Morrison is being questioned by British intelligence about his sources for sensitive historical information. Marie Dubois has been arrested by French authorities for possession of documents obtained through illegal means. Frank went pale. He's eliminated the journalists. Not eliminated, Garrett corrected. Detained, pending investigation. Amazing how quickly terrorism charges can be filed when national security is threatened. David's secure phone confirmed the worst.
Text messages from editor contacts. Chen arrested. Morrison in custody. Dubois detained. You see, Captain, I've had 60 years to build relationships with people who understand the importance of protecting certain secrets. Your investigation threatens not just me, but everyone who has benefited from the intelligence I've provided over the decade. Detective Dubois was frantically coordinating with his superiors. Captain, Belgian authorities are receiving pressure to surrender you to American custody. Multiple NATO allies are filing formal protests about unauthorized intelligence operations on their territory. Garrett smiled. The beauty of long-term intelligence work is that eventually everyone becomes complicit. Every government that received intelligence from me, every agency that used information I provided, every operation that succeeded because of my activities, they're all invested in protecting my secret. David stared at the screen, realizing the true scope of Garrett's protection network. It wasn't just American intelligence, it was an international conspiracy spanning multiple governments and decades of cooperation. Frank, we need to get out of here now. But Frank was studying Garrett's image on the screen with intense concentration. William, you made one mistake. What mistake? You're not in your care facility anymore. You're in a government building, probably CIA headquarters in Langley, which means you're directing active operations, not just protecting historical secrets. Garrett's expression flickered. Frank continued, Captain, record this conversation. We have William Garrett on video actively directing the suppression of evidence about his criminal activities. That's not protecting classified information. That's obstruction of justice and witness intimidation. David realized Frank was right. They had Garrett on camera admitting to coordinating the arrest of journalists and the suppression of evidence. Mr. Garrett, thank you for confirming that you're still actively involved in intelligence operations and criminal conspiracy. This recording will be very helpful in prosecuting you for ongoing crimes. For the first time, Garrett looked uncertain. Captain, you're playing a game you don't understand with stakes you can't afford. No, Mr. Garrett. I'm finishing the mission my grandfather died trying to complete. And unlike 1943, this time the evidence is going to reach the right people. David ended the call and turned to Detective Dubois. How quickly can we get this recording to international media outlets that haven't been compromised? Already transmitting to contacts in Germany, Italy, and Japan. But Captain, if Garrett can coordinate arrests across multiple NATO countries, he can reach us anywhere in Europe. Frank gathered the evidence files. Then we don't stay in Europe. Captain, do you have contacts in non-NATO countries who might be interested in this story? David thought about international colleagues from his recovery work. I know people in Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, countries that have investigative journalism traditions, but aren't under NATO intelligence agreement. Detective Dubois was already coordinating transport. We can get you to a non-extradition country within 12 hours, but once you leave European jurisdiction, you're on your own. David looked at Frank Henley, 97 years old, and still fighting for justice, 60 years after his grandfather's death. Frank, are you willing to leave Europe to see this through? Captain, I've been waiting 60 years for William Garrett to face justice. I'm not stopping now, because he's finally gotten scared enough to show his hand. As they prepared to evacuate the communications facility, David realized that Garrett's aggressive response had actually strengthened their case. Instead of just historical evidence, they now had proof of ongoing criminal conspiracy and witness intimidation. Bobby's mission was almost complete. The cargo flight from Brussels to Auckland took 18 hours, during which David and Frank worked frantically to coordinate with media outlets in Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa. Detective Dubois had arranged their departure through unofficial channels, but warned that their protection ended once they left European airspace. The Sydney Morning Herald confirms they have everything, David reported as their plane crossed into Australian airspace. The Auckland Star has independent verification of the financial records. The Cape Town Gazette is coordinating with anti-corruption journalists across Africa. Frank, despite his exhaustion, continued organizing evidence. We need to ensure publication happens simultaneously. If Garrett gets advanced warning, he'll try to discredit the sources before the information goes public. David's satellite phone rang. An encrypted call from Colonel Thornton. David, please tell me you're somewhere safe. Janet, what's your status? Are you under arrest too? Not yet, but I'm being investigated for unauthorized disclosure of classified information. David, the situation has escalated beyond anything I've seen in 20 years of military intelligence. What do you mean? William Garrett isn't just some rogue agent protecting old secrets. According to sources I can't identify, he's been running a parallel intelligence operation that spans multiple agencies and countries. Your investigation has threatened a network that includes people at the highest levels of NATO governments. Frank leaned toward the phone. Colonel, how high does this network reach? High enough that 3 sitting intelligence directors have submitted sudden resignations since yesterday. High enough that the CIA director is claiming he knew nothing about Garrett's post-retirement activity. High enough that the president is being briefed hourly on damage control measures. David felt vindication mixed with terror. They're panicking because they know we have proof. They're panicking because Garrett's activities have compromised national security for decades, and everyone who knew about it is now exposed to criminal prosecution and international embarrassment. The plane landed in Auckland. New Zealand intelligence officers met them at the airport, not to arrest them, but to provide protective custody while they coordinated with media outlets. New Zealand doesn't have extradition agreements that cover intelligence whistleblowing, explained Inspector Sarah Williams of the New Zealand Security Intelligence Service. You're safe here, while the story developed. David and Frank were taken to a secure government facility overlooking Auckland Harbor, where they established communication links with journalists across the southern hemisphere. The time differences worked in their favor. While it was night in Europe and America, it was daytime in Australia and New Zealand, giving them working hours to coordinate publication. The Melbourne Age has connected Garrett's activities to intelligence failures during the East Timor crisis, reported David, after hours of secure communications. The Wellington Post has traced his influence to New Zealand's participation in Iraq War intelligence assessment. Frank was reviewing timeline documents when his expression changed. Captain, look at this. The timing of major intelligence failures over the past 20 years corresponds exactly with operations that required international cooperation. The kind of cooperation Garrett was facilitating as a consultant. David studied the timeline. September 11th intelligence failures, WMD assessments in Iraq, Russian election interference, all required coordination between agencies that Garrett had access to. Either he was the most incompetent intelligence officer in history, or he was deliberately sabotaging operations for someone else's benefit. Inspector Williams had been monitoring international communications. Gentlemen, we're receiving interesting reports from our intelligence partner. Multiple European agencies are claiming that Garrett's activities were authorized under classified international agreements that can't be disclosed. What kind of agreements? David asked. The kind that don't exist in official records, but provide plausible cover for criminal activity. It appears that Garrett's protection network is claiming his betrayals were actually part of authorized intelligence sharing, designed to maintain global stability. Frank laughed bitterly. 60 years later, and they're still trying to sell the same lie. Garrett wasn't maintaining stability. He was profiting from conflict by ensuring no side gained decisive advantage. David's satellite phone rang. An unknown international number. Captain Mitchell, this is Ambassador Chen Wei from the Chinese Ministry of State Security. We understand you have information about American intelligence activities that may be relevant to our national interests. David looked at Frank and Inspector Williams. This is Captain Mitchell. What kind of interest? We have reason to believe that the American officer you're investigating has been selling Chinese intelligence to multiple Western agencies for several decades. We would like to arrange a meeting to discuss mutual cooperation in exposing these activities. After hanging up, David realized the international implications were expanding beyond NATO. Frank, if Garrett was selling secrets to China as well, this isn't just about Western intelligence cooperation. It's about a man who spent 60 years playing every side against each other for personal profit, Frank replied. And now everyone wants to know exactly what he sold to their enemies. Inspector Williams received an urgent communication. Gentlemen, the situation has become extremely fluid. We're receiving requests for information from intelligence agencies in over 20 countries. It appears that Garrett's activities have touched operations worldwide. David coordinated final publication details with the international media outlets. Synchronized release in 6 hours. Full documentation will be available on multiple servers to prevent suppression. Frank struggled to his feet, moving to the window overlooking Auckland Harbor. Captain, your grandfather would be proud. After 60 years, William Garrett is finally going to face justice. Frank, are you feeling all right? The old man smiled wearily. I'm 97 years old, and I've been fighting this battle for most of my life. I'm tired, but I'm not stopping until I see Garrett's face on the front page of every newspaper in the world. David's phone buzzed with a final message from William Garrett. Enjoy your victory, Captain. But remember that some secrets have consequences that last longer than the people who reveal them. 6 hours later, the story broke simultaneously across 3 continents. American spy sold secrets for 60 years. Dominated headlines from Sydney to Cape Town. The evidence was undeniable, the documentation comprehensive, and the international implications staggering. Within hours, William Garrett was arrested at CIA headquarters in Langley, charged with treason, espionage, and conspiracy spanning 7 decades. The arrests extended to intelligence officials in 12 countries who had protected his activity. Frank Henley, at 97 years old, became the key witness in what international media called the longest-run espionage case in modern history. And Lieutenant Robert Mitchell, missing since 1943, was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor for his sacrifice in attempting to expose the betrayal that had cost countless Allied lives. But as David watched the news coverage from Auckland, he knew the real victory wasn't the medals or the arrests. The real victory was that after 60 years, the truth had finally defeated the conspiracy that killed his grandfather. Bobby's mission was complete. 6 months later, David Mitchell stood in Arlington National Cemetery as Lieutenant Robert Bobby. Mitchell was finally laid to rest with full military honor. The Belgian government had repatriated his remains after investigators confirmed the crash site, and the army had arranged for the ceremony that had been delayed by 60. Frank Henley, now 98, sat in the front row of folding chairs, his testimony having been crucial in convicting William Garrett of treason, espionage, and conspiracy. The trial had lasted 4 months, and revealed the full scope of a betrayal that had influenced international events for 7 decades. Present arm. The honor guard's rifles snapped to attention as Bobby's flag-draped casket was lowered into the earth beside other heroes who had died serving their country. David accepted the folded flag from the honor guard commander, thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. His grandfather's mission, launched in September 1943, had finally been completed in a New Zealand government facility. After the ceremony, David and Frank walked among the white headstones toward the tomb of the unknown soldier. Frank moved slowly with his cane, but his eyes remained sharp and focused. Frank, what do you think Bobby would say about all this? The old man considered the question carefully. I think he'd be proud that the truth finally came out, but I think he'd be prouder that it came out the right way through proper investigation, international cooperation, and legal justice, rather than vigilante action. David nodded. The international tribunal that had tried Garrett had established new precedents for prosecuting intelligence crimes that spanned multiple decades and countries. 12 nations had revised their intelligence oversight procedures, and NATO had implemented new safeguards against the kind of parallel operations Garrett had run. Have you heard the latest on Garrett's sentence? Frank smiled grimly. Life imprisonment without possibility of parole. At 94, he'll die in federal prison. Justice may have been delayed, but it wasn't denied. They paused at a bench overlooking the ceremonial grounds. Frank pulled out a worn photograph, the same unit photo David had found in Bobby's crashed aircraft. I've been thinking about this picture, Frank said. Your grandfather, me and the other men who knew about Blackbird, we were all young then, thought we were fighting a war that would end with clear victory and defeat. Instead, you discovered that some wars never really end. No, Captain. We discovered that some wars are worth fighting for generations. Your grandfather started something in 1943 that we finished in That's not failure. That's persistence. David's phone rang. Inspector Williams from New Zealand Intelligence. Captain Mitchell, I have news from the international investigation. The tribunal has declassified documents that provide the complete scope of Garrett's activities. What did they find? Operations in 47 countries over 60 years. Financial transfers totaling over $200 million. Intelligence compromises that influenced the outcomes of 3 wars, 12 international crises, and countless smaller operations. Frank leaned toward the phone. Inspector, what about the other survivors? The families of men who died because of Garrett's betrayals. The tribunal has established a compensation fund for victims of Garrett's activities. More importantly, they've created an international database to prevent this kind of long-term intelligence betrayal from happening again. After hanging up, David and Frank sat quietly among the headstones of Arlington, thinking about the cost of secrets and the price of justice. Frank, do you ever think about what would have happened if Bobby had succeeded in 1943? Every day, thousands of soldiers might have lived. Dozens of intelligence operations might have succeeded. The Cold War might have developed differently. Do you think it was worth pursuing after all these years? Frank turned to look at David directly. Captain, your grandfather died believing that some truths are worth any sacrifice. I've spent 60 years proving he was right. David thought about his own journey from a routine crash investigation to an international conspiracy trial. His military career had ended when he'd requested asylum in Belgium, but the Department of Defense had offered him a position with the newly created International Intelligence Oversight Commission. Frank, I've been asked to head the investigation into other historical intelligence cases that might involve similar betrayals. Are you going to accept? I think Bobby would want me to. There are probably other secrets out there, other conspiracies that have been protected by classification and intimidation. Frank smiled. Your grandfather would be proud. But Captain, promise me something. Promise me that you'll remember the difference between secrets that protect national security and secrets that protect criminal activity. Bobby died because he understood that difference. David shook hands with Frank Henley for what both men knew might be the last time. At 98, Frank had accomplished what he'd set out to do 60 years earlier. William Garrett was in prison. The truth was public, and Bobby Mitchell was finally recognized as the hero he'd always been. As David walked away from Arlington Cemetery, he thought about the mission parameters that had shaped his grandfather's final flight. Primary objective: extract high V-value intelligence assets from German P facility. Secondary objective: destruction of facility to prevent reprisals. Bobby had failed to extract the prisoners, but he'd succeeded in identifying the source of intelligence betrayal that was compromising Allied operations. His real mission, the one that had taken 60 years to complete, was exposing William Garrett. David's phone buzzed with a message from the International Intelligence Oversight Commission. Captain Mitchell, your first case assignment involves missing OSF's operatives from the Pacific Theater, 1944 to 1945. Files suggest possible intelligence betrayal similar to Garrett case. Report for briefing Monday. David smiled, thinking about Bobby's final transmission. If I don't survive, investigate all missions authorized through Blackbird Channel. The investigation was continuing, and somewhere other families were waiting for the truth about their missing hero. David drove away from Arlington Cemetery, knowing that his grandfather's mission had become his own, ensuring that the people who died serving their country weren't betrayed by the people they trusted to honor their sacrifice. Lieutenant Robert Mitchell's final mission was complete, but Captain David Mitchell's work was just beginning. In the distance, the autumn sun set over the nation's capital, casting long shadows across the graves of heroes who had died believing their sacrifices mattered. Bobby Mitchell was finally home, and his grandson was carrying on the fight for truth that had started with a crashed P-51 in a Belgian forest and ended with justice in an international courtroom. Some missions take generations to complete, but they're always worth finishing.